All right, good evening. Thank you for joining us for tonight's virtual artist talk. My name is Rebecca Manning. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Kate Horvat. A lifelong resident of Kansas City, Kansas, Kate Horvat is the art program director and instructor of art at the University of St. Mary in Leavenworth, Kansas. She earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from Northwest Missouri State University and a Master's in Fine Arts from Arizona State University. Horvat's works have been displayed in various national and international exhibitions, and she has been the recipient of many prestigious grants and awards, including the Artist's Book Residency Grant at the Women's Studio Workshop in Rosendale, New York. Horvat's solo exhibition, No Endpoint For The Stubborn, is currently on view in the Mulvane Art Museum's first floor galleries. The installation both commemorates the recent 100-year anniversary of the ratification of women's right to vote and points to the reality that the fight for equal rights continues on today in the interconnected civil rights and feminist movements. In 2019, I approached Horvat about this project because of her demonstrated ability to generate visually complex and multivalent work, which critically engages popular culture and politics. Since that time, it has been amazing to watch her ideas evolve into the striking and poignant exhibition that is on view today. No Endpoint For The Stubborn will be exhibited through December of 2021. If you have not yet had a chance to experience the exhibition, I encourage you to take the time to see it. We, the Mulvane, are also offering an opportunity for people to take a class that relates to the exhibition. On Saturday, September 18th, Kate will be teaching a workshop titled Layers to be held at the Mulvane from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. You can register for the workshop on the Mulvane's website, which is mulvaneartmuseum.org. As with all of our educational classes, scholarships based on financial need are available. This evening's artist talk will broadly cover Kate Horvat's artistic practice and will discuss the work on view at the Mulvane. Following her presentation, we will have time for a Q&A session. If you have a question or a comment for her, you can submit it in the chat. I see that there's already quite a bit of wonderful love in the chat. Continue to submit. I'll note comments, etc. Without further ado, I am going to turn this over to our speaker for this evening, Kate Horvat.
Hi, everyone. I do want to start off with thanks for Connie and Rebecca for inviting me to exhibit with the Mulvane Art Museum. It has been an absolutely wonderful experience and opportunity. So thank you. And thank you all for joining me today. I wanted to start off, let's see, with talking about work, some of my previous work that led up to the show at the Mulvane. I was kind of wanting to find, there's never a direct line or link between works, but I think there's definitely correlations and things that influence each other. So I just decided to start back when I was living in Arizona and right out of grad school. So my graduate work centered around collective desire. I was really interested in why people wanted what they wanted and where did desire come from, and what happened when you got what you desired. But it kind of shifted into collective celebration or action. And so I graduated in 2016, summer of 2016. I was offered a show at a gallery in Phoenix. And if you remember 2016, it was a pretty politically tense summer before the election in November. And so I had this great sense of building tension, collective building tension in the United States. And I wanted to explore some of our collective celebrations. So I decided to make work about our national holiday. And so you'll see at the top, this is a CMYK screen print. So C and Y and K are just letters for types of ink, and it's a process color that you can basically get 100 million different colors out of 4. So this is a large fabric screen print titled "Who Knows America?" And you'll see fireworks at the top that have not yet exploded. And as you work down the image, you'll see them fully explode. I wanted to kind of release whatever tension, or at least have some, to me, this was somewhat of an answer to the tension that I was feeling. I kind of wanted the election to just be over with. Unfortunately, the tension didn't quite subside. It might have escalated. Here is a detail shot of that work. So these are kind of cooling embers of an explosion. The work was placed in the gallery next to, there was basically a place where you could sit and watch the fireworks. So it was a singular chair to watch the spectacle in front of you. Next to that was a cooler of beer. And this is for the election year. Budweiser came out with a a specific specialty America beer. And I started thinking, okay, you would hear sometimes the phrase, the real America, and I quickly was suspect of what that might mean, because what defines this country? And I don't think that there is one distinct real America. And so it was in a gallery in Phoenix, and it was an outdoor gallery. And so this ice would have melted in about 2 minutes, but I decided to make fake ice, which actually looked even more kind of refreshing than possibly real ice might. It looked very cold. Please excuse the tiki torches. That was a decision that was made before it became a symbol of white nationalism. But it was part of an aesthetic that I was interested in exploring, of this kind of ultra patriotic, kind of in your face type of explosive American expression, which it's a little bit of satire in there. So this piece specifically is when I started working with more digital images, and started using that dot pattern, exploring what that dot pattern, where it might be able to go. I've also always been interested in bookmaking, and bookmaking in the sense that it's a really wonderful vessel or a carrier of, or way to control cadence. So because you can only experience it one page at a time, you have a unique opportunity to create pauses, or allow disruptors or surprises to appear in the book. So this was an opportunity that I got to work with a university in Valencia, Spain, where they sent me books that had been discarded from their library. And I was able to pick a book and then make a new book from it, send it back, and have it be part of their collection. So they gave me a choice of a couple books, and I decided to create a work from a satellite communications book and explore my relationship to the sky. And so to me, the sky, as in up above, represents a type of endless possibility, an infinite possibility, but also it's at the same time terrifying. And so I decided to title this book, "You Have Always Been in My Heart," because the thought of those extreme possibilities is irresistible, but also terrifying at the same time, much in line with the concept of desire. You might desire something, but what do you get when you, what do you do with it when you actually get it? So this, you can view this book almost as a dialogue with the sky. So I'm just going to flip through the pages. You can experience it that way. And there is more to this book, and you can do the rest of it on my website, but each piece or each piece of paper is a different type of blue, and what a blue that I envisioned the sky could be. So I printed all of these pages back to back and just tried to increase the density of this blue, and to distort the previous text, the acquired text. Another significant project that has influenced the current show is a book that I created and published with Women's Studio Workshop. And the title, The Sun is Shining, but I Don't Trust It. This particular book dialogues a year in the news era of Trump. So beginning in November 2017 and ending in the historic 2018 midterm election, it was a record-breaking number of women were elected to US Congress. We'll talk a little bit more about that later as I go through this particular book. But for a year there, I collected source images from the front web page screens of 4 distinctly different news sources, but major news sources and sources of information: CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and NPR. And some monoprint layers combined with headlines, brash headlines and noisy imagery that mimic the 24-hour news cycle. So as I came to this book with the notion of trying to understand what trust and faith in institutions meant. And I thought of the title, or I kind of heard the title when I was waiting in line for tacos in Arizona. And I heard the woman in front of me. It had been raining for a couple of days, and in Arizona, obviously it's a desert. It doesn't happen that much. And so it had been raining for a couple of days, and it was actually a much needed rain. We had been in a drought for a couple of 10 years, I believe. And the woman in front of me was talking to her friend. The clouds had just parted and we were outside. And she said to her friend, "Well, the sun is shining, but I don't trust it." And I remember thinking distinctly that, how can you not trust the sun, lady? It's here for you every single day. You live in one of the sunniest states. How do you not trust something as consistent and reliable as the sun itself? And so it made me think of some maybe deeper undercurrents or undertones of generalized lack of trust in institutions or faith in powers that be. And so I decided to start trying to analyze and collect where that might come from. So I decided to go to the 24-hour news cycle, which there's a lot of content for. This piece is meant to mimic a computer screen and scrolling. So as you flip through the pages, you basically get lost in a sea of information in red and blue. I wanted it to feel like you were swimming and moving while simultaneously being frozen and being forced to slow down with each image. Because one thing that seems so disposable about our news consumption is the fact that it's so fleeting. News by nature is an event, and it's sensational, and it's kind of a spectacle, not always a spectacle, but it's always an event. And so I wanted to almost slow it down for just a minute, just to understand it. I cannot say by the end of this book if I understand anything more to a greater degree of clarity, but I think it does help me understand even the archive of all that happened in this year. It always seemed like the news cycle was relentless, but now we have a physical archive of a handful, 50 pages of this one particular year. This midterm election was historic for many reasons. It was historic because the largest percentage of women are now represented in Congress and our legislative body. And when I found out that exact number, I was actually quite disheartened about that, because it jumped up to a whopping 23%. So 23%, I decided to represent that, and there's 50 pages in the book, but 25% of these pages are blue. So that is 11.5 pages out of 50. So I wanted some sort of visual representation of what that actually looked like. And it's sad that it was 2018, and that was a monumental achievement, especially, I mean, a win's a win, but I think a lot about disruptors in my work. So how can I speed up the viewer? How can I slow them down? How can I make them move in their proximity to the piece? And in general, well, as of late, the projects have been more labor intensive and have required teams of people to work on. So that's just kind of a picture of one of the interns and I printing together. It was we had to physically print together. So as I was working on this book, I was basically swimming in these dot patterns. And so I would be looking closely and scrutinizing each print and image, as printmakers do. Shout out to all, I'm Brad. But so I'd be looking at images like this constantly, up close and personal, seeing these dot patterns. And this dot pattern, I chose this specific one. A lot of times you use what's called a halftone, and that is a really mechanical circular dot. I decided to use a technique called diffusion dither, in which you process an image and the computer randomizes the dot. So it was used in the first iteration of like Xerox printers and things like that. So it was important for me that the computer or technology had a hand in how the dots fell by chance and how they were arranged by chance. So as I was looking closer and closer at these images and these dots, I noticed that at some point the image would be so distorted that it almost appeared as a different thing. And so that had a staying power with me. And I was looking at images like this all the time, not just Rudy Giuliani, but images that were heavily packed, densely packed with dots. And so as you're checking these screens, this is a screen, a silk screen with a backlight, so we can check if the exposure and the washout was properly done so that the ink can come through the screen properly. in a way that was consistent and up to standards. So I would be looking at this, and as I would see these dots, I would often think of them as almost falling confetti or in free fall. It had this sort of a free fall type of feeling, or suspended in time, a frozen image. And so I couldn't get enough, basically. And so when I came back to Kansas City and got the job at University of St. Mary, I did not have a screen printing facility, but I was still kind of obsessed with these dots, and I wanted to understand how I could replicate them. And so it became at first just an exploration in color and wanting to sit down and draw, but it quickly made me realize this is another form of distortion, one form of distortion, but then also another form of kind of slowing down and freezing of a very, very fast-paced information cycle. I just feel like there needs to be more time to digest and understand some of these monumental events that we've been experiencing as of late. Or I do get that chaos is constant, but it seems either we're just maybe more aware of it. So I started cropping them and distorting them even further from the really highly recognizable imagery and prints that you saw in the book from Women's Studio Workshop. So these images are taken from the first impeachment proceedings. This is Nancy Pelosi's right hand, left hand or right hand, and this is her other hand. So, and you'll see right up here, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but right above her hand is a microphone that kind of got lost in the sea of dots. So I started playing with arrangements as well and seeing how I could place maybe the line of the table, line them up, and try to recreate a fragmented scene. And this is just a close-up of Adam Schiff's hair that I decided to do a color study about, and then I was playing with arrangements. This is one of the latest dot drawings, but it was made, it was completed in January, I believe, of 21. But it was one that made me think a lot more about the microphone and voice and understanding platform through visual communication specifically. And so I'm really isolating individuals' gestures. So I did just tell you that's Nancy Pelosi's hands, so now you know whose hands those are. But I'm interested in what we read into the hand that is off to the side, and the one that is holding the pertinent information. How are we receiving the information through non-verbal means? Oops, well, wrong one. Okay. And there's a detail shot of, I'll spare you the details. The other ones I haven't titled yet. They were so early, and I deeply think about titles, and so I never want to rush any of that, but I haven't sat down to really quite think of the titles for the other ones yet, besides Nancy Pelosi's hands, but that's not the right title. This one is on paper. Another individual with a microphone. And that is kind of what pivoted over to the show at the Mulvane, No Endpoint For The Stubborn. So when Rebecca approached me about to create work, we talked a lot about these recent dot drawings that I had been working on, and how she was looking for an individual who could speak to the 100-year ratification of the 19th Amendment and the suffrage movement, and talk about more contemporary feminist issues, because as you can see, and as we know from current events, progress, or if you want to say civil rights, is not a linear or always forward thing. There's going to be peaks and valleys and regressive acts. And so it's always something that needs to be maintained and protected. So I want to start first with the banner pieces. So there's really two pieces in this show, the banners and the pennants or the flags. And so these banners are 80 by 36 inches on Yupo, which is a paper-like substance, and so they're colored pencil and acrylic. These four banners depict it was hard to choose individuals, but I chose these four individuals who have or continue to dedicate their lives and life work to the betterment of other women's lives. So we have on the left Fannie Lou Hamer, who was an American civil rights activist. Angela Davis, activist. Gloria Steinem, activist. Everyone here is an activist. And then Malala Yousafzai, who was famously or infamously shot by the Taliban, survived for advocating for women's education in Pakistan. So to get a more close-up view of some of these works, you really have to step back and step all the way back to even semi-digest these images. The closer you get, the less perceptible it becomes. The dots kind of work together in a free fall. I found myself asking questions about the dots. Is there some sort of coordination to them? Are they forming alliances? How are they interacting together to create this image? So I'm thinking a lot about what depends on the next thing to create a whole. So parts to a whole, but also cooperative interdependence. There's Angela Davis, and you'll notice some of it's harder, and some of the images it's harder to see, but each individual has a microphone or a platform from which they're speaking. And then Malala's hand. This is the most obviously a microphone. And to give context for scale, there's my hand. So as I was working on these images, it was dizzying. But it was really a time to focus and reflect and really respond. You do one dot at a time and you kind of respond to the next one, and you try to understand, how can I make sense of this really at first glance seemingly kind of chaotic or imperceptible image. But that was part of the wonderful challenge of actually creating this work. Some more images for scale. So the way that this work was actually implemented was I had these printouts, digital printouts from FedEx or something, that I processed the image with Diffusion Dither to a scale that I would actually be able to draw. And then on Yupo is kind of a really slick surface, but it doesn't absorb water, so it won't buckle like large pieces of paper. So I would have to paint the background with gesso. I'm going to show a quick video. I would paint as a time lapse the back with gesso and light yellow paint, but it couldn't be too thick so that I couldn't see through it with the light table underneath. So that's just prepping for what would be, so the surface could be receptive of the colored pencils. So the painting part was a little bit fun, because it was not a little bit fun, of course it was fun. It was a really fast type of expressive action, almost to prime me for the very slow, tedious work of drawing. Oops. We're gonna always be, no, okay. And then when Rebecca and I talked a little bit, I had sent some basically digital mock-ups of pieces I was intending to make. And she kept talking about this vibrancy and this saturation of yellow. And that really stuck with me, because she also, can this translate, how can this translate in from digital to the actual pieces? And I thought, well, I mean, I think it can translate, I'm not sure. And so that was always in the back of my mind, as to how to continue to allow these pieces to almost glow and keep that action-oriented symbol of yellow. And of course, that's a direct reference to the women's suffrage movement. So these were painted, prepped, ready to go to start durational drawings. I thought it would be helpful to kind of show some progress shots. So I'm going to go through one particular drawing from start to finish. And everyone would ask, how long did these take on average? And I would take a picture after every single drawing session, and we'll talk about those drawing sessions too. Every single drawing session, just to even understand what a timeline could be with these pieces. And the timeline was different for each one of them. Because the dot density matters. So higher density of dots in the image would take longer. So it really, some images came faster than the others. And then as you do more drawings, you understand the technique a little bit better. So on the left is the day before, and then on the right is the day after, and then I'll go in chronological order like that. And sometimes I would think, what did we do today? What actually got done? And so I'd have to almost study these photos right before bed and say, okay, we filled in part of the scarf. It seemed like hours. Oh, it was hours, but we filled in part of the scarf. I think I missed a day on this one. That would have been a lot to do in one day. Well, we possibly did it, but I believe that I missed a day on this one. And then of course there's a lot of cleanup afterwards, but yeah, I thought it would be helpful to see a process. And the other thing that was really wonderful that happened, just because of the nature of this work, of how I chose to set up this project as far as implementing it, it was really labor intensive. And so with COVID, there was points in the studio, and this was before the vaccine, at some point before the vaccine, I would be in my studio and working, and my friends would say, well, they want to either hang out, of course, masked or whatever. And I'd say, I can't, I'm in the studio, I've got to work. And they'll say, can I come over here and just hang out? And I said, sure, you can come over to my studio. We had I was comfortable with our masking policy there, and they would come over and sit and talk with me. And after a while, people would start to ask if they could draw, because they would ask questions like, well, how long does it take you to draw these things? And I'd say, well, I don't know. I just draw dots every day. We'll see how it gets done. And they would say, well, do you need any help? How many more do you have to do? Are you sure you can make this on the timeline? And I'd say, well, actually, yes, you're kind of freaking me out. Please come and help me draw dots. And so it kind of just went from there. And so after that, I had some regulars. So from left to right, these are all of my aunts. So Therese, Bernadette, and Monica, who would come and help on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, depending on the schedule. I had a steady schedule of individuals helping me draw. And so we really got to sit around the table, talk about the images themselves, but also catch up. And it almost seemed like, is it sewing circles or knitting circles? It was a really special thing that I did not expect to happen from this particular project. A couple of other individuals who were always there is Laura and Dustin. Dustin was there just about as much as my aunts. And so they were a monumental reason that this project got done. And I feel like I formed really wonderful friendships and deepened existing friendships through this process. Not pictured, for some reason I didn't get pictured of Eliza. I know she's here. Eliza helped with, she was my studio assistant for the longest time, and she would be there. She was there from almost the very beginning, helping out. So thank you so much for everything. And then also Tiara Davis, Kathy Lauber, Heidi Schultz, and Josh was even there for a day. So I wanted to talk about the Penance as well. So these Penance or flag pieces are the second piece in the show. These pieces were, as I was doing research for this particular show, I was looking through a lot of printed ephemera and suffrage printed ephemera, and this flag or a pendant shape kept popping up in different variations. And I was kind of imagining each individual holding a flag and thinking about how the collective action can make a greater impact, obviously. And so I think about how can I make my pieces depend on each other. So each flag basically depends on the other for context. And it's almost an infinite amount of context, and I'll get more into that next. But so from the images that I collected through my research, I basically cut out different forms and templates and was imagining how they might manifest into actual flags. And of course, sewing prototypes, a lot of prototypes and trying to understand how to incorporate color and text. And I love the painting action from the banners so much that I decided to extend that, and also as a connecting link in the Penance. And so I would dye them and paint them and have different type of noise in the background of this text that I was printing on them, text and image. So for those of you not familiar with screen printing, the book that I had done in Swimsuit Workshop was screen printed. So it's basically a stencil form of printmaking in which you push ink through a screen that has been strategically blocked and designed into a stencil, in this case through photo emulsion, to be able to print on whatever you want to print on. Basically, you can print on a lot of things with screen printing. But fabric is an obvious one. So you'll see on the right is a screen, left is a image ready to be printed. And then on the left is the print, fresh print. So you can see it's still wet. So you can see kind of the gleam or the glare, the glare on the image. And then there's me with the power washer, because I was washing out a lot of screens. I always find a way to use screen printing so that I only am making one print from my screen. So I don't know why I'm using it that way. It's meant for multiple, for replication, but I'm always finding a way to make it not that. So I thought I would show you a quick video of the printing process. I'm just placing the ink in as evenly as I can in a ribbon right up top here. And the same ink color is that I use to paint the backgrounds of the banners too. I'm a squeegee. I'm gonna kind of we'll do one lighter pass, and then you say my hand is holding the side of it almost like a hinge. And then I'm going to apply more pressure for a second pass, and that's it. That's the print. And then I need to burn another screen, clean that out, and waste not, want not. Always recycle the ink if you can. So that is that process. And then after that, it was a steady assembly line of sewing. So the same individuals who helped me on the drawings were right there, helping with flags. They kept saying, what's the schedule? When do you need me? Specifically, my aunts were saying, can I bring scones and coffee? I felt like, what did I do to deserve this? This is amazing. So here's them installed. Yeah, and I'll show a different view of them as well. But there's 60 flags in total. So there's too many to go through one by one to show some of the text and images that were taken. They face each other. And then there's another one right as you come in, another grouping. So again, I think of them almost as like larger versions of the dots. They're working with each other and how they interact. And so some of the phrases that were, basically each one has either writing or an image on it. And I selected and specifically found questions from printed ephemera, posters. I was interested in what were calls to action and what the calls of action were, and also what potentially are some of the big questions that are asked in prominent feminist texts. And then I also added some of my own questions. So I removed them from the context of their time, place, author, and anything else really. So I really wanted to see, how do these questions stand up on their own, and how do they stand up when they are together? There's Malala's hands up there again. So I'm thinking about nonverbal communication, and then of course, removing some of the context of these big questions. And that is No Endpoint For The Stubborn. I really hope that you're able to come to the show like these fine folks. And also, I hope that you're able to come to the workshop if you're interested. We will be doing the Dither drawings. And so be ready for have a really meditative experience. And if you don't finish them there, I will show you how to finish them. And if you're interested in seeing more of my work, you can visit my website. So thank you all very much. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Kate, so much for that fantastic talk. Please do submit any questions or comments that you have for Kate about her work generally, about the show, anything else that seems relevant while we're waiting for questions to come in. Kate, would you talk a little bit for us about how research sort of related to the project at the Mulvane specifically, but in general, how do you use research in your practice?
So research in my practice, I think the work naturally comes from that. So starting with a question. So for instance, the line about the sun is shining, but I don't trust it. That led to me thinking about other greater questions about, okay, well, maybe where did the sentiment come from, and kind of like following a lead, basically. And then trying to understand human behavior, which I mean, I don't think anyone can quite understand, but basically the curiosity around human behavior and how our behavior affects or impacts the next person is what drives my research. But then the research at for my show at the Mulvane, I think was a little bit more direct in the sense that it was able to have this distinct focus, or what I thought it was like, oh yeah, this is quite a distinct focus. It's the 100-year ratification of the 19th Amendment. So I can directly relate to that. But what it really did was open it up and expand into so many possibilities that I hadn't thought of before. So it's like, as I was making, I was continually learning alongside the making process. So I hope that answers your question, but I always wanted to be very careful about my own communication regarding the work and my own impact in that communication. So yeah.
Wonderful. We have a great question. Kate, do you see these labor-intensive works as a form of artistic penance or reverence? How does your work impact your life? Where does the need to create work on the subject come from?
Yeah, that's a great question. Oh, sorry. That's a great question. Thank you, Eliza. And I know you got to experience the labor-intensive work firsthand. So I do see it as a way to, like, almost like a forceful way to slow down, and slow down to digest these large events. So it gives me personally a chance to mull over the impact of some of these things, and then in turn ask even more questions. Let's see, the other part of this: how does this work impact your life, and does the need to create work on this subject come from? So I think it impacts my life in the sense that it's kind of like a stop and smell the roses, or to slow down. And to also, in this case, it opened up possibilities of collaborative work and deepening existing relationships and conversations. So I think it really opened up a lot of possibilities for future work. Yeah. Thank you.
And then I think we had one other question, essentially asking if you have any plans for your exhibition that is currently on view, which of course you generated as a prompt, you know, that I came up to you and said, hey, I want to make this work, but it's still an interesting question. And is there anything, I mean, you made all of that work. Is there anything you're planning to do with it?
Well, not at the moment. I know that, so the Mulvane has collected the 4 banners. So the Penance, I'm not sure where they're going next. They have no plans yet. But I do see a lot of opportunities with the penance because you're able to, or they're able to exist and change in whatever space they exist in. Exist and change. So because even as I was deciding on how to lay those pennants out for this particular installation, it could have gone a million ways. And so, and you're able to read them in a linear way, but you most certainly don't need to. So the short of the long is I don't have any plans yet, but I'm open to them. And I think the pennants especially are malleable, but they do depend on one another because some of the questions really can't exist with some of the other questions. They seem to prompt a little bit different type of dialogue than I was intending, unless they're paired together.
Okay, I have another question. You know, oftentimes, as from a curatorial perspective, as you're working on an exhibition, current events can sort of change the meaning of something, or something in your personal experience can change the meaning of something. And I'm wondering if, you know, we started this conversation in 2019. I'm wondering how this project and the works that you've created, its meaning has changed possibly for you over time.
Yeah, I think that especially with with the most current events of the question of the future of Afghanistan and women's rights, the recent legislation in Texas, I think that it's constantly changing. I think that it also brings to light the fact that it's always needs to be discussed as far as individuals' rights being at risk of being taken away. I'm not sure if that's exactly the right way I want to say that. But yeah, I think it's always going to be relevant. And that's why, in part, I chose to remove context from some of the quotes from the Penance, because I wanted it to see this spans 100-year history, and these questions are still relevant. And so it kind of speaks to the relevance of, it speaks to the need, as maybe a more direct way of saying that. So I hope that eventually some of these questions are null and void, moot, but I doubt they will be. But if anything, like my friend Ruben always talks about, you got to think of the archive. So if even at the very least, not the least, I hope that this can exist in an archive in a sense of like a sign of the times. So.
Ruben just sent you a heart emoji.
I saw that.
Okay, one more question. I'm guessing this is perhaps an art student. If I open an exhibition, what should I be careful about in order to convey my sense of the world to the audience?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think it is really telling that you, Rena, asked about being careful. And I know that I think about that a lot, but I think of it in terms of impact, because being careful is, I hope that doesn't imply, because sometimes there's a very contentious dialogue that might surround certain types of work, but I would hate for that to be a silencing factor for some sort of pressing issue, especially if you are sharing your worldview in a way that is respectful and does what more good than harm. And I know that's a black and white good and harm. I know that is contentious in and of itself, but if you're able to think, I always think about impact versus impact and intent, and the distinction between those two. And also the silencing factors of how might I be silencing other voices versus how my voice might be silenced before it starts. And is that coming from, where's that coming from? And so I think it's a delicate balance, but a worthy endeavor, especially because our field is the field of communication, of visual communication. And so I say get out there and communicate.
One last question, if we may. How do you think about expressions of anger in your work?
Oh, that's a good question. I think of anger as, when I used to work in mental health, it was like a huge revelation when I overheard a conversation about anger as a secondary emotion and what is the root of it. And so it's usually either sadness or fear. And so I think an expression of anger is an expression of, say, either fear or sadness, or maybe an insecurity that might, you might feel threatened in some way. And so I'm always trying to understand how to be able to express something and give it the weight and gravity that it that is appropriate, while not escalating so much that it's at a tipping point, because there is action-oriented language, and that's necessary, especially if action is being called for. But there's always a compassionate aspect to it. So I hope that the anger comes with compassion.
Thank you so much, Kate. This talk was spectacular. The exhibition is fabulous. No Endpoint for the Stubborn is on view in the Mulvane's first floor galleries. It will be up through the semester, December 2021. As I mentioned earlier, and as Kate mentioned, she is going to be teaching an artist workshop all day, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. on Saturday, September 18th. You can register for that on our website, mulvaneartmuseum.org. And thank you everyone for coming and for all the good questions and all the loving comments.
Thank you so much.